It was a while ago. It was like more than 10 years ago last time I did it. And I think like now it's like way more crowded than it used to be. And you need a permit to like do anything in national parks now, right? And
yeah, which is kind of crazy, but that one makes sense, I suppose.
No. All right. Hey folks. Welcome to the October Filecoin Green meetup. I think we're going to start in a couple minutes. Happy to have people on Zoom and watching through YouTube. If you want to check in the chat and just let us know where you're watching from, go for it. I am just outside of Seattle. Hey Jason. Yeah, I know you're in Minnesota. Nice. How's it going?
It's going really well. Fall colors, leaves are changing, so it's beautiful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Fall colors in Minnesota, but no like snow yet. It's probably a good like sweet.
Yeah, it's a good mix. All the beauty, the torture.
Awesome. The folks checking in from Atlanta and Alaska, which have like a lot of similar letters, but are very different places. Welcome. Medellin, yeah, awesome. Yeah, we're all going to be, a bunch of us are going to be in Colombia, are already there or are going to be there next week, which I will get around to. Anyways, thank you everyone who is watching on YouTube and is here in Zoom for joining us for the October rendition of the Filecoin Green meetup. The way this is going to work is I'm going to give an introduction and talk a little bit about something that's on my mind, which is the structure of Filecoin Green. We are thinking a lot about the structure of our project and how to communicate that structure in order to decentralize the project and allow more people to plug in. So I'm gonna go over some of our current thinking on that first. Then we're gonna hear from Luke Schubert, who's here representing Open Forest Protocol. They are doing some of the most interesting work in the DMRV space, allowing people to monitor forests and prove forested areas, and take that and use that as an input to carbon offsets. So we'll hear about that. And then we're going to hear from Nirvaan, who's part of Cello Climate Collective, that's doing some of the most interesting work in the space, like really not just protecting environmental assets and ecosystems, but really connecting with local communities and building bridges right between what's happening on chain and what's happening on the ground in both the natural world and with local people. So the first thing I want to mention in my intro is that if you are planning to be in Colombia or in Latin America next week, October 12th, please come to the Sustainable Blockchain Summit LATAM. So this is going to be a really great event. We're going to have a bunch of folks there from many different projects that are involved in tokenized carbon and in sustainability, with a huge focus on projects that are happening in Latin America. A keynote speaker there is going to be Delton Chen. He started a project called the Global Carbon Reward. That is, if you've read the Ministry for the Future book, the Ministry for the Future is the fictionalized account of this project, the Global Carbon Reward. And actually, if you do a very close reading of that book, The Ministry for the Future, it's based on something called the Chen paper, which is explicitly Delton Chen. So we're going to hear about his plan to use to decarbonize the global economy with a project that actually sort of operates on the scale of climate change, right? So global problems and global solutions happening there. So, please, if you are interested in coming to SBS, please go to sbs.tech and you can get more information about the speaker lineup there and register. Tickets are just a donation that you can set the donation amount to whatever you want. And all of that money is going to be going to the Kayapo project, which is a indigenous-led project protecting a huge amount of forest in the Brazilian Amazon. So a lot of good stuff going on there. So like I said, I wanted to talk about a little bit about what exactly Filecoin Green is. I've used this diagram to explain it before, and talked about how there are two goals of Filecoin Green. One is to make Filecoin itself verifiably sustainable, and the second is to use Filecoin and Web3 to build the world's best tools to measure and reduce environmental impacts. Right? We really think that storing the data associated with environmental impacts on Web3 based platforms makes a lot of sense because of how we work with data in Web3. We've talked about this a lot. We've written about this a lot. But I wanted to talk about specifically, how does Filecoin Green work? What are all the moving pieces to it? And so I'm gonna just screen share this over here. This is a Figma diagram of the structure of Filecoin Green. So the purpose of this is really, if you are interested in joining us, if you're interested in doing something that interfaces with Filecoin Green, right? Say you want to apply for a grant, so you want to do something, so you want to help us out, or do some project that stores on Filecoin and helps verifiably decarbonize the network, or you want to verifiably decarbonize some other system and do this in a way that uses Filecoin Green resources. This is sort of a diagram as to how to plug into this, right? So this, the Filecoin network is up here. The way to read this is that, storage providers contribute to the Filecoin network. They are the backbone of the Filecoin network. They run nodes on the network. They store files and they prove that that data is being stored over time. So the storage providers really create the Filecoin network, right? And one of the outputs from the Filecoin network is data on how much data is being onboarded onto the network and how much data is being stored over time in that network. So the Filecoin network itself outputs data that's used as in this dashboard, right? So if you've gone to the Filecoin.energy dashboard, just Filecoin.energy in any browser, you can look up node by node, storage provider by storage provider, what the estimated energy use is of these individual nodes, right? And we're adding emissions functionality to that. We aim to add e-waste to this. This is sort of the structure that we're aiming for of Filecoin Green, right? Not all of these pieces are fully filled in yet. So also something that storage providers can provide is documentation of their sustainability practices. So, and also things like their location, things like if they're buying renewable energy, they can supply that. We need some way of validating that information is right. So we're building this network of auditors who are able to attest to those inputs, and those audited records go to they exist, on Pando, on Estuary. The goal is for all of this to be Web3 native, right? So the auditors are going to be signing these records. Those records are going to exist. So you can look up for a given storage provider. You can compare the dashboard estimates that are totally Web3 native, just based on activity on the Filecoin blockchain. You can compare that to actual audited records of things like energy use from individual storage providers, right? So this is a way that we can have these sort of parallel tracks, right? Where we can use estimates and factor those into some sort of a green score if we're trying to determine how sustainable a given storage provider is. We can also take things like energy use, that goes from a storage provider through things like power bills that they submit to some auditor, get the identity of that auditor, have them sign a record, and use that in a green score too, right? So there's both of those different tracks to get as much information as we possibly can about the energy use and other environmental impacts of storage providers from all these different sources and have them converge. Then the goal then is to go from green scores and information that we have for individual storage providers to the level of network-wide sustainability reporting. So this is something that is really cutting edge for how we think as a broad community interested in ESG and interested in sustainability, about going from sustainability claims at the level of an individual entity, right? So if you read, say, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol or Science-Based Targets, this is all based on the assumption that you are measuring something that you have some amount of control over, right? So you can define your operational and organizational boundaries of your organization And the entire premise of the way that we do sustainability reporting is that we are able to draw those operational and organizational boundaries with organizations that we have a lot of visibility into who controls them, right? So a big frontier in sustainability reporting for blockchains is how we go from these individual nodes, which have well-defined organizational and operational boundaries, but they're pseudonymous. We don't know who controls them, up to how do we ladder that up, all of these shards of information that we have from different sources, right? Because not all storage providers are going to be audited. Not all nodes are going to want to let people know where their location is. Not all nodes are going to want to submit their power bills for any sort of public consumption or auditing. How do we go from all of those fragments of information that we have to put bounds on what we believe about the network-wide sustainability, right? So that's a super interesting set of problems, right, to be working on. How does the greenhouse gas protocol sort of collide with or merge with, and how do typical sustainability reporting guidelines interact with the actual behavior of a network, right? So that's something we're hugely interested in. And then on the bottom, you can see here, so there are renewable energy producers and brokers. There are offset producers and brokers. There are people who are producing other types of environmental products, right? And so those products can both be consumed by the sustainability reporting, right? So say a storage provider buys renewable energy from some Web3 native project that is tokenizing renewable energy certificates. Say they buy offsets. Say they buy things like recycling credits. Those can all be used as documentation of their sustainability, location, and impacts. And those projects can also store on Filecoin, right? And so we're building portals like Co2.Storage in order to make this as easy as possible. We've talked a little bit about Co2.Storage. There's going to be a lot more news on that coming up soon. But the idea is that then because we believe that the best way to monitor impacts and sustainability related information is to give it a CID so that it's immutable, so that it's verifiable, so that we have this chain of custody, and so that when records are updated, we have a very clear assessment, right, of why those records were updated, who updated them, and where did that information come from. We believe that the best way to take all of the sustainability related information and store it so that we can actually ladder it up to really sort of bulletproof sustainability reports is to store it in a Web3 native way, right? So that's sort of the structure of Filecoin Green, right? So the goal of this, like I said, is to enable you, if you have a project that you think you can work with us, is to enable you to kind of see where are the different places that you might be able to plug in, right? And we are continuing to think about the structure. We're continuing to update this structure. If you have thoughts or feedback, we would love to hear from you about this structure. We're going to be writing more about it and producing more media about it soon. So if anyone has questions about that, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand, and I can answer questions about that specifically. If no one has questions about the structure of Filecoin Green specifically, or anything else I talked about, like the Sustainable Blockchain Summit, we'll go on to Luke and then Nirvaan. After any of these individual presentations, if people have questions about that presentation, we can answer them then. We're also going to stay in the Zoom room for a while. We'll turn off the YouTube broadcast or the live stream, and we'll stay and just hang out in the Zoom room for a bit. After that, if anyone has any questions or thoughts or comments or concerns, or wants to just chat about sustainability in Web3. Looks like we don't have any questions about specifically the structure of Filecoin Green or SBS Latin America. So Luke, please take it away.
Thanks, Alan. Anytime anybody asks me kind of like, hey, Luke, what's some cool stuff going on in the crypto space right now? I almost always mention Filecoin Green as a great example of that, because it's such a cool infrastructure play that is completely aligned with everything that IPFS and Protocol Labs is trying to do. But it's just a wickedly cool program that you guys got going on. So really appreciative to be here and to be talking. So hello, everyone. My name is Luke Schubert. I'm going to get my screen share set up because I got some slides that are not essential, but are helpful. Are we able to see this right now? Love a vocal confirmation if possible.
Yeah, all good.
Yes, we can see it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So yeah, I'll go ahead and jump right into it. My name is Luke Schubert. I'm the product development lead for Open Forest Protocol. So we essentially started, if you saw that diagram that Alan was just presenting, we're very much sort of towards the bottom in terms of the more infrastructural supply side, production of on-chain origination of carbon credits. We're sort of augmenting that sort of side of things with our DMRV system that we've established here. So we just launched in July after about a year and a half, 2 years of active development. Yeah, we'll jump right into it. So I started this is kind of a general take to look at the macro scheme to provide some context as to where we are operating in. But I hope that this is at least a little bit not new, but if it's new, then awesome. So these are just some basic statistics that highlights the importance of forest restoration specifically, because there's a lot of mechanisms in the world right now that enable the drawdown of carbon and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. But we are at this point focused on forests for a lot of reasons. One of the biggest ones is the potential that forests have. There's millions of square kilometers and tens of millions of hectares of land out there that is capable of restoration, that's been degraded. We have massive deforestation rates all around the world that are continuing, and based on primarily financial reasons such as the agricultural and mining and cattle raising and things like that. We have a significant amount of our total emissions reductions that can be accomplished through nature-based solutions. And we have a massively quick rainforest deforestation rate around the world, and it's quite alarming. There is also, when we talk about opportunity, the ability to turn some of these very bad things into potentially very good things. The main reason for deforestation rates are due to economic means. If we can find a way to create an alternative financial incentive to protect forests, then that's something that we can do to help generate income for local communities all around the world, particularly in developed equatorial-based nations. But we can also create a new system of value that values nature in a way that we're not currently doing at this point in time. Carbon credits is an example of one of those value schemes that we're seeing here. And within the voluntary carbon market alone, there's expected to be massive growth in the demand and thus pricing of carbon credits that are being created and being transacted. And these are essentially commodities that represent 1 ton of carbon dioxide that's been pulled out of the atmosphere and stored in a durable and permanent manner, whether that's in the tree bark or whether that's in certain mineralizations practices or biochar. Lots of really, really cool things that you can do to store carbon, take it out of the atmosphere and store it into a more permanent and durable medium. So carbon credits is essentially a way of quantifying that carbon that's been pulled out of the atmosphere and stored, and then you can sell that to corporations and individuals that need to offset their carbon emissions. You can reduce your emissions to a certain extent and then offset the remaining bit. At least that's the idea. So we're looking at opportunities, and we're seeing that there's still mass deforestation rates. So what's kind of going on here? Our main thesis at OFP is that it's due to the lack of MRV, measurement, reporting, and verification tools. So this leads to a lot of problems with forest projects. If you have a 1,000-hectare forest project, that's a pretty sizable piece of land. It would be very difficult for you to find a way of getting accredited for carbon credits. Typically, the upfront cost to get started is pretty expensive. I think we have, there's a lot of different ways to compare what we're doing against some of the existing monitoring services that are provided for forests, but essentially you get priced out. And it takes a long time, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of long process in order to accomplish this typically. And not to say that the existing processes are not fantastic, right? The people doing work in these traditional accreditation bodies, such as Verra and Gold Standard, are they've been in it since the beginning. They essentially established the voluntary carbon market. But at what we're seeing right now, our thesis is that that's not doing enough to address the existing problems of deforestation. So our solution is an open source platform that enables the communal verification and reporting of forest data at scale. We're able to do that through blockchain technology. So we'll just go ahead and move on to how OFP works. So this is a real rough outline as to how we are essentially streamlining and making more efficient the process of field monitoring and monitoring of land. So by creating those financial incentives to reverse deforestation rates, you have to have good integrity of data on the ground. And so that's what we're focused on first and foremost, is having good MRV data that's accessible and streamlined and radically transparent using blockchain. So the very first step in OFP is registering a forest project as an NFT. Basically, this is just a blockchain interoperable asset that contains data. We don't trade the NFTs, you don't auction them off, you don't sell them. It's basically just an asset that an individual blockchain person who owns a wallet owns and then uses over the course of their project's lifetime. And it's through that wallet that they're then able to receive any financial incentives or rewards from that project. What they do in the meantime is they collect data on the ground. This data is field data, so is pictures of trees, measurements of height, circumference, or diameter of trees, and yeah, essentially we have a software system that I'll get into that creates randomized sampling plots around a forested area, and then it's at those sampling plots that individuals then go and physically monitor that land. So if you own this forest project, if you're operating it, you can do that yourself, or you can hire people to do that. We have a pretty easy system in place to facilitate the kind of delegation of that responsibility. But once you collect that data, you submit it to the Open Forest Protocol dashboard. And that dashboard is linked through IPFS. We create CIDs of the data that's being uploaded for each stage of the project lifecycle. It's basically every year you're uploading data from the field and then uploading it to IPFS. And it's stored permanently in the NFT's metadata and then updated over time. So we just have the CID in the NFT's metadata and then the previous CID there as well. So we can have that kind of history of all of the data that's uploaded. The next step in this process is we have a group of decentralized validation verification bodies. These are organizations that check the veracity of monitoring claims and data that's coming from the field. So these are, in our case, existing VVBs that are used by Vera and Gold Standard, as well as remote sensing organizations that are able to lay a NDVI metrics index map over the existing project area, which is accessible through the NFT metadata. Or they're able to fly drones over the location or check the most recent satellite imagery of the project location to see what's going on there. So we're bringing together this diverse collective of organizations to evaluate this data and to make a judgment on it. So we can get into that in a little bit. But essentially, once that judgment, if that judgment is positive and that data upload is affirmed, then it opens the way for really cool smart contract executed results-based financing. So if data is good, then you get money. As simple as that. So this is an example of this is one of the products that we're making. So this is like the dashboard. Basically, this is during the project setup process. So a project would input various information bits about their project, saying, hey, here's where it's located. They literally upload a KML file, or they can draw on a map the physical boundaries of their project, provide information about it, and essentially lets them manage a variety of forest projects. So you access this dashboard by creating a NIR account. If you're not familiar with NIR, it's a great L1 sharded proof of stake blockchain. They are they have a very interesting account-based model. So essentially every NIR wallet they refer to as really a NIR account. It's essentially a smart contract that's deployed with a human readable address, kind of like the ENS service. But before that, it came out before that. And so like if I had a Luke.NIR account, it would essentially be my wallet, but it would also be a smart contract that I can give permissioned access to do things with. So in this case, I'm giving permissioned access to interact with my NIR account with the Open Forest Protocol dashboard. And it's through that system that projects are, we call them project operators or project developers, basically anybody that owns a forest project, are able to interact through this blockchain, basically with the blockchain. You're able to interact directly with it through our front-end interfaces. So in this way, we're able to create a fully blockchain native and blockchain interoperable kind of monitoring and forest monitoring product. IPFS is a really critical component to that, which is pretty awesome. I was mentioning data collection in the field. We have a mobile app that we've developed. It's super, super basic. A lot of people are like, so what does the app do? And it's like, well, the app's like, just a teeny tiny little, it's basically a one-directional information tube. It works offline. You just upload data whenever you connect to internet. You can take photos and measurements of the trees here, as you see. So all these different forest projects, sampling plots right here, and then the map of the whole project area. We also have a dashboard for validators to evaluate the data. We model it off of prediction markets like Augur or Flux Protocol, if you're familiar with those. So validators have like a game theory mechanism in place to incentivize voting for the right option. So incentives are dealt out to those who vote correctly. Disincentives are dealt out to those who kind of are trying to cheat the system or do things that we do not want. We can go through this, but I see we got about just 5 more minutes. So I'll just kind of rush through a little bit of some of what we're doing right now. Some of our new products coming out is an Explorer. This is just some early mock-ups of kind of what we're building right there. These are basically a way of taking all of that great IPFS data, we feed it through our indexer, and then we display it onto this great publicly accessible map of the whole world, where you can see all of this great project information all around the world. So all of the project data that's being uploaded and stored through IPFS is then kind of displayed here. We're also working on a wallet, native wallet, to be able to balance and perform cool features like offsetting and just collecting all of the great near-based cryptocurrency assets. Collateral Area is a cool little DeFi product that we're building right now that is helping to balance any carbon claims that might come onto the protocol and whatnot. So yeah. That's just a few of the examples that we've launched, but yeah, we have some statistics from not up to date, but we launched in July, as I mentioned, and we already have over 40 forest projects from all around the world registered on OFP and uploading data. So it's been a pretty exciting process to have this thesis about MRV and this thesis about really trying to get the truth of what's going on the ground and understand what's the ground truth element there. And so we've been very pleased to see it moving, and we have a lot of development ahead of us. So yeah, thanks for being here, and be happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Luke. That was really, really cool to kind of get an overview of and to go through. If anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hand or drop something in the chat. Let us know you want to ask something. I think part of an element of sort of the DMRV process that you laid out, right? That's I think really compelling, is you combine the fact that in order to increase trust in a carbon offset and increase trust in the idea that what's on chain actually reflects what's happening on the ground, you need to take data from all of these different sources, right? And you combine that with the fact that if you have people on the ground actually measuring trees, literally measuring trees and doing that work to monitor what's happening in the forest, that's a job that you can pay people for. And so there's this sort of natural fit, right, where you can enlist people who are actually in these communities to interact with their forests and benefit from that. I don't know if you have thoughts on comparing that model to a more sort of traditional model, and both in terms of those data streams and also how you're able to access local communities more directly about just sort of how DMRV is sort of the way forward there.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I mean, to my understanding, my best knowledge, the way that, so let's say that you're registered on Verra, which is a major carbon accreditation body. They're the OGs of the voluntary carbon market. And so if you have a forest project there, typically the expectation is that you would have third-party verification of that data once per every 5 years. The reason for that is it costs tens of thousands of dollars. You fly out an independent consultancy team to go and conduct the field monitoring, evaluate all the documentation of the reports that you've made in the previous 5 years. You're doing self-reporting, but it's not really actually evaluated by that third party. As we move forward with mass deforestation rates, we really believe that 5 years is not an acceptable enough time period to be reporting and monitoring on this, especially when you can have more frequent monetization of this project and have more frequent engagement with that project. Because a significant percentage of the global forests are actively owned by indigenous communities around the world. So whenever we can try to bring participation and bring a monetary incentive towards that, that's a really huge benefit. So what we want to do is, and what we're doing here is providing the opportunity to provide data more frequently, have that evaluated more frequently, but it's completely free for projects to use besides any operational costs that are necessary on their end in order to conduct the monitoring. But in order to use our platform, it's completely free. So long as someone is capable of, and we're also building pre-funding and forest financing products that are in the pipeline right now to help provide that upstart funding for them, the operational costs. But so long as you're able to do that, you are able to access the global pool of capital that wants to invest in nature-based solutions, particularly reforestation projects, which is what we're focusing on right now. But if you own a forest project, you're able to report on that transparently and with extreme fidelity of data, because it's coming from the source. It's very difficult to cheat. The system that we built, all of our photos are geofenced, so you can't take photos in the app outside of the project area, really outside of the sample plot. So you have to be in the sample plot or within a certain meter distance of that in order to actually take photos. And then as we build in new Oracle streams into the validation mechanism, then we'll be able to have a lot of really, really cool data about these forest projects.
That's awesome. I think that totally makes sense. Right. I think, especially 5 years is way too long, right? It's like we need super granular data about these projects, especially considering that we need to, according to the IPCC, decarbonize the entire global economy by 50% or so in something like 8 years by 2030, right? So it's like the idea that you're only getting these data points because it's so expensive to like fly teams out there every 5 years, just like doesn't accord with that. And I think also that really touches on like, if you use nature-based solutions, the standard should be that if you are offsetting your emissions by protecting a forest, if that forest burns down or gets deforested, your like credit should go away, right? And the fact that we don't have sort of high bandwidth information right now in existing offsets about like exactly what's going on the ground, I think is like doesn't enable that, right? It just like from an information flow perspective, it just like doesn't work.
Totally. And essentially like it makes a lot of sense too, because we're in the crypto space, right? We're in the blockchain space. And we get asked the question a lot of like, why do you need blockchain technology to do this? But whenever you have a commodity or a source of value that's based on data and transparency of that data, you can't really get much better than blockchain to be able to record that information and maintain a high degree of transparency there. So that's one of the main things too that we're providing is that, because it's from the very beginning, whenever you interact with the system as a project, you're interacting using a blockchain-based account. It's not any Web2 application that's bridged over. It's entirely blockchain native. And that's something that we think is really going to be able to be a big source of value for a lot of projects going forward, because you can see the pictures of the trees for 20 years, forever, basically. But 20 years down the road, we'll be able to look back to the very first data upload and the validators that voted on that data and anything else that was available there. And then every single year, you're going to get that checkup. So totally.
Awesome. Mota has a question in the chat. Would it be possible to share the data schema you use in OFP, or is that already available somewhere?
Yeah, I just want to kind of clarify what you mean by data schema.
Feel free to unmute Mota, or I can. I think what he means is when you have data associated with an offset, the schema like underlying that offset. Or Mota, is that where you're getting at?
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, maybe we are actually making something being called Co2.Storage. And we are enabling actually projects like yours to upload their data on IPFS and Filecoin. And that could be something interesting for your project in the future. So, but the idea of CO2 storage is basically to accept different kind of schemas, basically that, each project can define the data schema they will be using. So you showed like on your screen, like the form that you are using to upload the data. So that's basically the data schema. It was just too fast for me to realize exactly what's in the form. So if you can share this with us, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And thanks for that clarification. You also do not need to sell me on CO2.Storage. Mark Johnson has already beat you to that one. But yeah, it would probably take too long to do that right now. But if you'd like to follow up, I'd be happy to talk with you about that. Basically, and I see another question was, are you engaged in the MRV process itself, or and then creating those, or working with best practice standards? So essentially what we've done at this point, and this is the first iteration of OFP, it's going to evolve over time. And our intention is not just to limit this to forests, right? This is a data oracle that can be applied to many different types of environmental data reporting schemas. But our goal is to iterate over time and improve. So right now we've essentially adopted most of the methodologies from like the clean development mechanism to monitor forests and in a way to assess basically just what's going on, like field surveys. So the algorithm that's used to detect and calculate the number of sample plots over a specific area, that's incorporated into this. We also incorporate height and diameter. We ask for circumference measurements on the ground, photos of the trees just for, to assess whether or not they're living and what the status of that is. So that's just kind of a cursory glance as to what that data schema composes of. But I would say that it's probably pretty custom to what we're doing, because we're trying to balance our ability to adopt the existing and really kind of integrate and work with the existing best practices of how you conduct a field survey in a forest, while also trying to work with the current user base of OFP and work with the forest projects that we're working with and understand what is valuable to them and what are important pieces of information that they want to have representing the organization and the work that they're doing on the ground. So I see also James asking, does the cost of human compare with near orbit satellite monitoring? Yeah, it's a really great point. One of the reasons why we're also kind of focused on field data, there's a lot of remote sensing organizations out there, and they do a lot of great work. But for the most part, if you are a small 200-hectare reforestation project in Kenya, which we have several of those on board right now, I can tell you, you're not going to be able to afford the services of almost every single remote sensing organization unless it's free. So, there are a vast majority of forest projects out there that just are priced out of these kinds of systems. And we're trying to create partnerships to provide those services for free. But yeah, that's kind of the reason for the emphasis on the ground, because so long as you can cover the operational costs, which if you can see some revenue as a result of that, then it's usually pretty worthwhile. But yeah, so long as you can cover the operational costs, OFP is pretty much free to use, as opposed to, there's pricing structures all out there that you can check out.
Awesome. Thank you, Luke. That was great. I'm a huge fan, like I said in chat, of all the work you're doing at OFP. And I think a lot of eyes should be on this space, right? Just because I think what we're bringing to, I think what the refi community, right, is bringing to MRV and DMRV, and really taking some of these solutions that are already there underlying nature-based carbon offsets, right, which were sort of the best we could do, in the past couple decades, right, and really upgrading them to say, okay, actually, given the way that we work with data in Web3, we can really give you this granular view and enlist people on the ground to sort of actively participate in these projects and take all these pieces that come together to both upgrade how environmental accounting is done and have a much more sort of direct to people on the ground and more decentralized way of managing these types of environmental assets. I think it's coming together in a way it's just so compelling. Please watch this space.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Yeah, we're excited, and we're growing and we're experimenting. So I think what we have right now is a great first iteration at this, but we're going to see how it works, and we're going to see how we can improve this over time.
Awesome.
So yeah, thanks everyone so much.
All right. Next up, we have Nirvaan from Cello Climate Collective. I want to point out I wore my Refi Summer Cello shirt today because the work that you're doing at Cello and the Climate Collective, building on what we were just talking about, right? Using Web3 to go and really enable people on the ground to contribute to and benefit from these systems. I think the work you're doing at Cello is super, super exciting. So let us know more about it.
Yeah, excited to, and thanks, Luke. That was an excellent presentation. I really think the focus of OFP, and first off, that you guys have been working on this since before refi was a hashtag. 2.5 years is quite a long time, so it's amazing to see all of this come to fruition. And I know it takes quite a lot of effort, so just congrats to you and the team. Yes, so hello everyone. I'm Nirvaan Ranganathan from Climate Collective. Here today. Actually just got back from Colombia, where I was at a greenhouse retreat with a couple of folks from Filecoin, where hung out with Caitlin, Ori, Mark Johnson, of course. And the theme there was actually interoperability. So I think this is a very timely meeting today, and actually I'm going to have a bit more of a developer hat on today than necessarily kind of the work that Cello is doing on the ground, but I'll certainly weave in some of those stories as we go along. So let me try to share my screen here. Is that looking fine?
Yeah, all good.
Excellent. Great. So just as an overview, I'll just quickly go through what Climate Collective is, leading into Celo, and just talking about sort of what the climate applications look like on Celo today. So kind of zooming out a little bit from one specific project and more talk about what I would say more broadly is going on. And then some takeaways that I had from the weekend, just spending time with the Filecoin crew and just discussing interoperability more broadly with folks in the space. And last, some takeaways that hopefully we can chat about after this. So firstly, what is the Climate Collective? Some of you may have seen this map on the right floating around Twitter and whatnot. Climate Collective, we call it an innovation network that supports a lot of different companies building at this intersection of Web3 and climate. With the actual mission is to develop a trusted and liquid market for high quality digital environmental assets, as we call them. So things, for example, that Open Forest Protocol is bringing on chain and really just bringing a lot of the supporting data to prove out the quality of some of these projects that is just very difficult to do today. In terms of positioning, we are very closely aligned with the Celo ecosystem. I think the way I say it, we have one foot in the Celo ecosystem and the other very much, well, at the moment, dipping our toes, but really trying to get more involved in interoperability and cross-chain functionality, which I will dive into a little bit later. But high level, we are a grant-giving organization, so about 28 grants since March this year. Quite a lot to keep up with, but I will be going into some of those shortly. I would say, so the theme of the weekend was interoperability across chains, but I think that another big part of it is intraoperability, which is not actually a word, across projects that are working on the same chain. So anything that can talk to each other today, ideally should be. So part of it's like avoiding redundancies and people developing the same pieces of infrastructure or products, coordinating roadmaps and fostering strategic partnerships. I would say we had a interesting protocol review workshop for one of our projects a couple of weeks ago where Filecoin came up. And again, I will get to that shortly. Last but very much not least, developing visibility and community education around the broader space. So that's what the map in part is an attempt at, but more broadly supporting kernel, refi podcasts and other such resources that are really helping serve as, I would say, an on-ramp for a lot of talent and newcomers to the refi space. So as mentioned, we are very, very closely aligned with the Celo ecosystem, where the Climate Collective, I would say, spun out of. The initial North Star was essentially this vision of sacred economics, where you're essentially collateralizing or backing money by things that we care more about, not gold or cattle as it used to be hundreds of years ago, but rather nature. So in a way, Climate Collective spun out of that idea with the Celo Reserve and Celo Mento stablecoins, but Celo itself is a proof of stake, EVM compatible layer 1 chain. Everything is written in Solidity, same token standards across, so fairly familiar to developers, but you might ask, why not just make it an L2? And the main reason for that is the mobile first architecture and the phone number linkages. It's not, there's a lot of work to still build on top of there, but I think foundationally being able to access the state on chain as well as link your phone number to a wallet address really unlocks a lot of access in emerging markets and a lot of places in the world where like mobile phones are far more penetrated than, let's say, laptops with a MetaMask wallet. So we really think Celo is a great tool, especially for remittances, really reaching the end user where they're at, which is what the third point is about, both Valora and like mobile first wallets essentially that are utilized by a number of players, some of them more with respect to UBI. So some great work that is being done by Impact Market. There was a very interesting pilot right at the start of COVID between Grameen Foundation, Celo, and Umoja. Umoja is essentially solving for the problem of disbursements at scale, where just making up numbers here, but let's say you have to disperse 20 million in carbon offset purchases among 500,000 people, project developer and people who are associated with project developers in form of like a carbon royalty. Like that's not a terribly easy issue to solve. I mean, without copy pasting and airdropping addresses, it gets very difficult. So Umoja is essentially solving problems like that, where they're able to do payment for ecosystem services and carbon credit royalties through this kind of transparent and streamlined dashboard. And that's really would say where we see Celo, especially given the conversation of interoperability over the weekend, really where Celo shines is like remittances to the end users. Lastly, and I'll circle back to this, but the SDKs are built very well for play well with mobile first development. So whether that's progressive web apps or React Native, things are built really for mobile. So yes, so since the start of the year, in Climate Collective and Celo collaboration, there's been quite and as a lot of us here know, there's been quite an explosion of projects that are building Web3 applications. So a couple of these need no introduction, Toucan Protocol and Flow Carbon probably, but you can see kind of the way we've started categorizing things. You have a lot of the carbon offset players, either tokenizing existing supply or finding ways to tokenize new forms of such as non-nature-based credits, or purely just originating a completely new supply such as Carbon Path. Also, a key vertical here is, as Luke was saying, DMRV. We agree with that thesis that is the main bottleneck at the moment of being able to define an impact claim halfway across the world. And how that has kind of been a big roadblock for why the current status quo voluntary carbon market has not quite scaled to the value that it needs to be. So a couple DMRV players, which I will double click on and lead into the next slide. But otherwise, I would say land stewardship. Someone was mentioning, the idea of geofencing certain activities from the app, and I think that's a great example of something that we're trying to pilot with Astral Protocol, who is written over here at ASTRAL, essentially providing geospatial tooling for smart contracts, which folks like Collectivo are essentially using to create what you can think of as a localized or sovereign DAO. The logic of me sitting here in New York, what do I know about the ecological state or the priorities in Curacao? I should really be governed by the local population there. So there's this concept of a geo NFT that then gets fractionalized and utilized towards this stewardship. But just wanted to highlight that as well as a kind of interesting integration that we see across the board. Of course, real world assets, whether it's renewables or plastic or e-waste, supply chain financing, or even, let's say, interesting ways of crowdfunding, such as the Kickstarter Creative Crowdfunding Protocol, which I wish existed. Some of you may or may not have heard of Redemption DAO, but some interesting ways to mobilize capital, whether it's towards renewable energy or towards, let's say, like different types of projects. Of course, markets, places where you're able to transact. I won't spend too long there, apart from saying, you have things like permissionless liquidity pools, permissioned KYC gated exchanges, NFT marketplaces, OTC swaps, all the kind of standard tools of the trade that you would expect. And last, but of course, very much not least again, is demand. I mean, ultimately, we need to make sure that there's a consistent demand for these assets. They're being used ideally either to offset footprint or collateralize other assets. And just generate more education, talent, excitement about the space. So this high level is I would say the different categories of climate activity that are happening on Celo. Some of them, the taxonomy and the schema is definitely subject to change, and trying to make, like, in theory, in the future, plastics might become its own vertical, or biodiversity for that matter. But as things stand, this seemed the most logical groupings for the slide deck. So what does this mean for us here? Why am I talking about it? I am starting to see a large pattern of problems that can be really nicely solved, I think, through a integration between Filecoin and Celo. So as mentioned, DMRV is the key unlock in this space, and there's a couple different approaches to it. Open Forest Protocol has certainly been pioneering. It's quite a robust approach from the start. But high level, being able to engage a wide number of people for sourcing ground truths about environmental claims. So thinking about it in both being able to take a picture and get credit for it, or for another protocol to say, hey, we need data collected from X location. Someone please do that for us. So being able to structure it more as a forward or a bounty. So our opinion, this requires a mobile first app to be able to collect this data, and of course, robust storage capabilities for photos and videos. And I think ultimately being able to aggregate all of this in one place and aggregate all of this over time in one place would actually start giving us a much better picture of what is happening on the ground. So certain very specific examples are, well, one is Sylvie, who's working on tree planting and tree stewardship. But the one that I really wanted to dive into was Simplex DNA, who are developing what they call a proof of life protocol, which is essentially, you can think of it as a backpack where you take either air or water samples in this backpack, ship it to the nearest Simplex DNA lab. They then do eDNA barcoding on it, on the sample, and essentially figure out what organisms, based on the DNA, what organisms are actually living in this vicinity. So at least being able to baseline and kind of monitor biodiversity changes over time. And I think just going beyond carbon, I think this is a very important vertical to focus on, and something that's very difficult to quantify in the current methodologies. Like, we have ways to understand carbon sequestration, but biodiversity is far more nebulous in as credits go at the moment. So all of these, I mean, if you think of like eDNA is fairly complex, you're going to have massive data sets over time. And I think just a very clear fit, well, either between the, let's say, lower level, not lower level, but more simplistic, taking photos of a specific piece of land and sending it to Filecoin versus actually storing these large environmental data sets. I think both are very well suited to this cooperation between Filecoin and Celo. This leads me to the next piece, which is something I briefly talked with Caitlin about, and looking forward to chatting more about it, is now, once we have this massive environmental data sets, actually being able to execute computation on it and then generate meaningful insights. So I saw Mark had shared with me the recent update about what the FVM can do and the FVM actors, which I think is perfect for our use case, and especially that it's all in Solidity and everything that developers are already familiar with. I certainly think that the FVM, well, especially the actors and the new updates, are going to make a lot of this process far more efficient for us. And as I think a couple of folks have said already, CO2 storage. I think we have a lot of projects who are asking, what's the standard? What is the data that you need? And like kind of working backwards from requirements. So really looking forward to leaning into CO2 storage. It's interesting where CO2 specifically, whereas we'll bring like a large biodiversity data set, for example. So curious what those schemas might look like. And I think it's an open question and open discussions. It's a somewhat tangential question to the broader community, but asking, hey, based on what we have in Filecoin FVM actors, maybe there's some nice, like how Pandas for Python provides some nice visualization solutions. I'm just more generally curious if there's anything similar for Filecoin. But very tangibly, we have examples such as MRV Collective, which is aggregating a large amount of climate-based data to be able to essentially commission ratings and really serve as this aggregation layer to be able to combine, let's say, remote sensing, satellite, drones, on-the-ground measurements, all sorts of different data. And secured Gainforest, I think, was mentioned in Alan's deck, and another very exciting project, but one that I'll highlight here is Secured Carbon, which is essentially doing, I would say, like a feedback loop. Right now, we're not quite measuring the atmospheric content of CO2 across different places to see, hey, are our efforts for carbon sequestration in a certain area actually having the intended effect? So that's another, as you can imagine, it would be a mesh network of sensors all collecting a lot of data about the atmospheric CO2 content, all of which needs a home, which I do think that Filecoin and CO2 storage, and the broader FVM is a great choice for that. Which leads me to my big questions for today, which was how might we actually make this happen and make it easy for developers? So first is on a surface level, one thing that was talked about at the conference retreat last week was potentially cross-chain SDKs. And as a developer, I know the pains of pulling in two different libraries and dealing with dependency trees and version mismatches within, like, between those two libraries. So ideally, it would be great to just have, hey, can we create a cross-chain SDK either for client and backend side? But can we abstract some of these common patterns? Just upload a photo taken from a Celo DApp and put it in on Filecoin. Maybe eventually tying that together with Astral protocol and adding some geospatial logic in there, but starting simple with just abstracting some of these common patterns. Next is what tooling do we need? I guess that was my first point of maybe is it a cross-chain SDK? Very much open to input from the Filecoin community, who is certainly far more experienced with developing with Filecoin than I am. More broadly, just trying to understand what are the current pain points for projects. And this is one that Alan had mentioned in the start, which was the Gaia e-waste project, which is, you know, not carbon, not biodiversity, but a different type of real world asset that is very important to take care of. And folks that are, let's say, starting their development journey, but figuring out how best to incorporate both pieces of infrastructure. So this, I'd love to, I mean, if anybody wants to chat individually with me about it, I will, my contact details are on the last slide, but something that I, along with Celo developer relations, I'm very interested in pursuing of how best can we make this easier for the next set of applications that is developing using this stack. So yeah, I'll just wrap up here. I think call to action here is that, well, that there's a vibrant ecosystem of projects. The map that we put together has just grown so many multiples since we started in January. Second is that this weekend really showed me that interoperability is the key unlock. Like we should be, I mean, we talk about Lego blocks a lot and composability. Each L1 and protocol kind of ideally wants to do everything, but maybe should focus on what they do best. And then we can combine and put the pieces together, as I was alluding to in the previous slides. So then the big question is, what do we need? In theory, this is possible today. So what do we need to really make this happen? And that Climate Collective wants to help. As mentioned, we're closely aligned with the Celo Foundation and ecosystem, but really trying to be this bridge and this gateway for Web3 climate or refi projects across all the different chains to coordinate, collaborate, and build something greater than the sum of our parts. I'll end with that cheesy line there. Thank you. This is my contact details. If anybody is interested in reaching out, I would be more than happy to continue chatting.
Awesome. Yeah, the cheesy line, let's build something greater than the sum of our parts, is the perfect place to end. Thank you, Nirvaan. That was great. I didn't realize you were gonna just like lay out an entire like whole collaboration roadmap. This is perfect. Let's do it. I put this in the chat, but like, yeah, cross-chain SDKs for environmental projects, like, yeah, that sounds like a really, really high impact, point for us to collaborate a lot on. And I think as the FVM like continues to roll out, like, I think there's going to be a ton of opportunities to like build some really exciting stuff there. Yeah, I mean, a ton of things, again, like if people have questions, please feel free to, put them in the chat or like raise your hand or unmute. I think, a few things like a few really neat things jumped out to me about your talk, right? Thank you for framing it, at least in part, as like a Medellin recap, because that seemed like a great event. And I unfortunately could not be there, but it seemed really great. And that all of you like really dug into some of the really fundamental sort of sticking points and like things that need to be solved going forward to really unlock tokenized carbon. And thank you for highlighting interoperability. Intraoperability, you said, is cross-chain, and interoperability is like at the data layer. Is that how you're using those terms?
So I made it up. So I would say it's the opposite, because we were talking in part of the retreat, we were talking about all this cross-chain stuff, but most things on the same chain aren't even talking to each other at the moment. So it was saying, hey, let's get our houses in order and intraoperability, and then we'll get towards the interoperability, for which the infrastructure is not quite there yet, at least for all the different bridges and things like that.
Got it. So interoperability is you have different environmental assets that are tokenized on the same chain, and you just want to be able to like compare between them or like make statements that use data from like both of these different environmental assets. And then interoperability is you have one thing on one chain and another thing on another chain, and you want to like aggregate them or make some statement about the two of them, or have them talk to each other. Cool. Awesome.
Precisely.
Sweet. Yeah, and there's so much to unpack, right, in terms of what that means, right? And like all of the different subcomponents of like taking something as complex as an environmental asset and like getting to, you know, either of those operability conditions, right? Either inter or intra.
Yeah.
You know, I do want to highlight, like, I think, you know, the basic, the like fundamental logic of Celo, right? That like, you're going to take this currency, you're going to back it with real assets, and then you're going to tie everything sort of at the base layer to phones. Just like makes so much sense for this type of project, right? Where you're like really trying to, like we were talking about with OFP, like in Luke's presentation, like enlist people on the ground to like really be involved in this stuff. I was just looking up as you were talking. Apparently there are 6.64 billion smartphones in the world, which is something like 80% of the population. And like, that's not phones, right? That's like smartphones, which is like insane. Like it really is this like basically universal technology that if you build everything on this, you know, you can reach like way more people than you should be able to otherwise, right? Which is like super compelling.
That's what I absolutely agree there, and I think like mobile web is kind of the reason we have Web 2 in the first place. So I do think that's a huge unlock for that. And yeah, just to add to what you said in the beginning of backing all the stable coins by natural assets. I mean, I've been instructed to steer clear. I mean, just while the moratorium, I mean, there's a lot of regulatory uncertainty post the summer over what that really looks like. So it's certainly, I mean, it continues to be our North Star, but being fairly cautious about how that's approached, definitely.
Sure, totally. Samuel, do you want to ask a question or have some thoughts?
I don't have any question for now, but I just feel Web3 has a way of reshaping the world. When I mean reshaping the world, like we using Web3 for physical uses, like in a process whereby we have proper data management, we can see traces of data, and data is not being manipulated by anybody. Before an hacker can think of like hacking a node, it's not going to be easy to manipulate that data. So this is going to give us opportunity to create clean data. Let me say clean data, clean and pure data. So just imagine like the physical world where we are right now. We're trying to use like to resolve climate issues, you know, make people do, for example, I'm like the recycling project I'm working on, making people to try to do more to make the environment more green. So when we have records on the nodes, like, okay, this is being done by this. So that is recorded. So nobody can go and tamper with it. Nobody can, you know. So I think where we can actually really take over is when it's being used physically and more than virtual. Right now, we've been successful with NFTs. Now that's something virtual. That's something virtual. But let's bring it to the real world. When it's in the real world, then Web2 users be like, something interesting. This is something more interesting. And we know that carbon credits, it's kind of, I don't know, but it's not really like the future, but it's kind of like the future, carbon credits, you know? So people can use carbon credit. When people know they can use their carbon credits to buy things physically, they want to make the earth more great, you know? So it's giving people opportunity who don't have ways to get source of income. They know that, okay, if they can make this place clean with their carbon credits, they can use it to survive on it from day-to-day activities. So one of my goals is actually bringing Web3 to the physical world, and more than the virtual. We've done a lot of virtual, enough of protocols, too many protocols today, too many games, projects, but let's bring it to the physical world. And I think that is where the real movement is actually.
Yeah, I think a lot of people quit their jobs and started playing like play to earn games, you know, a few months ago or maybe a year ago, right? And it's like if the play to earn game were like really like doing good work to protect ecosystems, like maybe that would contribute to a much better world. I don't know, Nirvaan, do you have other thoughts around that?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just that high level, I very much agree, and that's in a way why I entered the space like full time. I would say, like, really seeing things actually get back into the real world is the compelling kind of use case and reason for me. You know, not necessarily to buy a hot dog with Bitcoin, but to buy coffee with carbon credits. In theory, that maybe that carbon credit that even originated from that coffee plantation. I'm just, you know, putting things out there, but really interesting real world use cases, like, you know, how you were describing. And just on the game side, as Alan said, you know, maybe there'll be some. I've heard of a couple impact to earn, or what is it, play to impact, something like that. That type of model. Curious what that will come in. I think it's just another good demand, like source of consistent demand for carbon credits. Yes,
yeah, 100%.
Yeah, but just agreeing, I would say echoing what you said, Samuel.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think that's a huge amount of the promise of all of this is like how you can, like you're saying, Samuel, like really tie it into actually what's really going on the ground, right? And to the extent that we can do that and make what's going on chain actually match what's going on the ground, right? And like build better sources of information. And, you know, and like part of that's DMRV, and part of that might be like cross-chain SDKs that are built for this. You can take data sourced from all of these different places and like collate them in order to get a really good snapshot of like when something happens on chain, like what does that actually mean about what's going on the ground? And when something happens on the ground that you want to pay someone for, like how does that like filter into digital assets?
Precisely. And Gregory had some very interesting concepts of interchain identity and all. I mean, it'll take some time for us to get there, but basically saying, hey, this is my Nirvaan Cello address, is this address that, and they'd be able to associate across all the different. So all of this, I think we can chat about ongoing. But if no other questions, I had a general question for the community, which is more broadly, I mean, of your thoughts on Cello, and like maybe if you're already familiar with, you know, development on Cello, or just broader thoughts. I won't take anything in a bad way. I'm just curious what the developer experience is like at this point. If anyone has any thoughts, feel free to get in touch. Yeah.
Anyone here who's developed on Cello who wants to chime in? We can also stop the live stream now. We normally end this with just hanging out in the Zoom room for a bit and chatting. So we can move to that. If anyone does want to chime in before we do that really quick, if you have any development experience on Cello and you want to mention anything, go for it.
Or any questions, happy to answer.